Hey Barry, good morning. How are you?
Good morning to you, Michael. I am fine and ready to talk about Adorno
Indeed, indeed. So today,
and Horkheimer
yes, both of them, and Juliette. Today
and
we
Juliette
are
and Sade.
embarking on part three of our grand mission to talk about the dialectic of enlightenment. This is Excursus 2, Juliette or Enlightenment and Morality. Um, the plan today is to talk about Kant and how Kant's Enlightenment really paves the way for the Marquis de Sade.
I think what's going on in this chapter is okay, where were we before? We'll mention that briefly. Where we were before is we were in ancient Greece and we were thinking about Odysseus and the ways in which the Homeric poets are rationalizing myth in the Odyssey and the ways in which Odysseus's mastery of nature and also his cruelty, the cruelty of some of his exploits, is kind of determined or anticipates other moments of enlightenment in Western culture. So we were way back when, right?
Mhm.
2000 plus years ago. Now we fast forward in this chapter to the European Enlightenment. We're talking about, there's a range of people, a range of writers that get mentioned in this chapter. There's Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche from the 19th century. There's Bernard Mandeville and some other rationalist thinkers from the early modern times or from the 17th century. Um, there's Immanuel Kant, who's living during the Enlightenment and actually coins the term in one of his essays. And then, not aware of each other, with no awareness of each other, there's also the Marquis de Sade, who has a front row seat at the French Revolution, which
Mhm.
for Kant was a signal, and doesn't know anything about Sade, but the French Revolution was for Kant the big signal event of enlightenment. He thought that was the political. Kant was famously a recluse, not a recluse, but famously a provincial. He lived in his hometown. He would read the newspapers daily for European news, but he thought that philosophy, he could stay home and do philosophy or go to the university and do philosophy. He's not a cosmopolitan, he's a cosmopolitan thinker, but he's not a journeyer or traveler. He stays at home. So when there's a French Revolution, he's watching during the French Revolutionary events, he's reading the papers and he's absorbing it. And he's engaged with foreign events in a way he never was before because he feels, oh, I've been talking about enlightenment for a while now. Hell, it's happening. It's happening in France. So there's a political equivalence. And now Sade is a part of that Kant doesn't know about. So let me try and bring the threads together. What I think is going on here is we fast forwarded like 2,000 years. And now we're in the Enlightenment era, the era of European thought that we contemporary, we sort of labeled the Enlightenment. Kant designated his era as an age of enlightenment. Um, Sade is very, Marquis de Sade is very proud of being a revolutionary. So So even though these are all in these thinkers that they mentioned, Adorno, Horkheimer mentioned, even though um, we can place them in the age of enlightenment, we tend to, and here I'm talking about contemporary readers, not just readers in 1940s, but also readers in 2025 or whatever. What's our year? We're 2022.
Close enough.
Um, but most readers would say, well, I realize that Kant and Sade coexisted at the same time, and they were affiliated with Enlightenment events to a greater or lesser degree. Um, but I don't think there's any necessary connection between Kant and Sade's a pornographer. Sade wrote erotic books. Kant is a German philosopher. And I don't see any connection. And most readers would I think, Adorno, Horkheimer soon, most readers would say, I don't see any connection between these two people, beyond a very loose connection. And then they would say, furthermore, they would say, Kant has nothing to do with fascism. So this gets to the mission of the chapter that we're going to be talking about. The mission of this chapter is that Adorno and Horkheimer want to say, not only is there a connection, there is a necessary connection between three things that we haven't really thought about as being connected. And those three things are the Kantian Enlightenment, Sadean liberation, the Sadean notion of sexual liberation, tied to the French Revolution, sex as revolution, which is what Sade is really thinking about. And the third thing, fascism, which is the thing they always want to connect Enlightenment, certain forms of Enlightenment rationality to. So that's the big business of the chapter. I think that's what the chapter is trying to do.
Yeah, I think that just to add on to that and sort of focus the argument a little bit, what I really think this chapter is doing is saying that, and I'll use Horkheimer Adorno's words here, that the Kantian optimism about the Enlightenment is really short-sighted or misguided. It's not in practice. It doesn't quite work out the way that
I like the
wants.
last one. I like the last one in practice because let me just say this real briefly. One thing that they have to do, it's a very careful negotiation because, Kant is very aware, and they show this. You're talking about the ways in which Kant is optimistic about enlightenment, and he is. But they quote passages, Adorno Horkheimer quote passages, where he does realize that if you don't have a commitment to morality, that he cannot ground within his or rationalize or explain within the system of enlightenment, that if you lose those moral sentiments, it's all going to go to hell. Mm-hmm. He's very aware of that. Now, that's not he is optimistic, though, to use your word, and I'll let you go on here. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the optimism is that Kant does believe that it's possible for reason to be autonomous without necessarily falling prey to that blindness. But he is very aware that the program could go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that to get back to your earlier statement about saying that you would look at Kant on one hand and the Marquis de Sade on the other and say that other than a historical overlap, these two have nothing in common, right? Yeah. That the argument put forth here is that Kant is I'll say it this way, that Kant is the optimistic version of enlightenment, whereas the Marquis de Sade is the practical enactment of enlightenment. And
brilliant formulation.
So that, I think, is the plan of today, rather than trying to connect this particular chapter to the current state of affairs in 2022, or if you're living in Barry Falk's world, 2025.
I'm always 3 years ahead of my time.
Thinking ahead. The mission of today is to look at how we move from Kant to the Marquis de Sade so quickly, and what the implications of Kant's, the implications of what happened when Kant's optimism meets reality. So we found a passage in here that I'm going to read, and if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to share, highlighted in 4 different colors to identify the 4 different sections of the argument that we're going to make today. And we're going to play it out. So I'm going to excuse me, I'm going to read slowly, and if you're watching on YouTube, thanks, and you can read along with me. So here we go.
What would Adorno and Horkheimer say of our color coding? I don't know if they would like it.
That's beyond me right now.
Beyond the reach of this podcast.
It's enough for me to try and decode what they're saying here, let alone what they would say. Anyways, so the text says, the root of Kantian optimism, according to which moral actions are reasonable, even when base ones are likely to prosper, is a horror of relapsing into barbarism. If, Kant writes in response to Haller, one of these great moral forces, reciprocal love and respect, were to collapse, then nothingness with gaping maw would drink the whole realm of moral beings like a drop of water.
So
So,
yeah,
so
do you want to
yeah, let me
gloss this? Yeah, please.
I'll start us on this. So
Yeah,
to
please.
me, the root of the Enlightenment mission is reason, right? And reason should stand on its own. It should not be directed by an external force, right? As I make my way through this, I keep coming back to the idea that reason simply is. It should be self-evident, and we can't force it or filter it through any other apparatus.
Right.
And so what happens here, in what Kant is saying here, is that according to optimism, the moral actions are reasonable, even when base ones are more likely to prosper, is a horror of relapsing into barbarism. If one of the great moral forces, reciprocal love and respect, were to collapse, then nothingness would drink the whole realm of moral beings like a drop of water. This is the first problem. Kant realizes that if we lose our morality, then man, we are in trouble. And the problem that we're going to get to is that without those external forces, when you detach reason from all of the externalities, the communal aspect of reason, or the communal implications of reason, we'll fast forward here. We get the Marquis de Sade. So that's my intro gloss on this. Do you want to add to that?
Why? How about I read the second part, and then because I think I'll gloss the second part in purple, in beautiful purple. I'll read the second part and gloss it because I think it directly pertains to the first point. According to Kant, from the standpoint of scientific reason, moral forces are neutral drives and forms of behavior, no less than immoral ones, which they immediately become when no longer directed at that hidden possibility, but when they become aimed at a reconciliation with power. And this sentence explains elaborates and explains the process that you just described, Michael. You were saying, well, there's something about without that sort of moral foundation, Kant fears. This is what you read in the first passage. Kant confessed, this is a confession to one of his critics. He says, I realize that if the great moral forces like reciprocal love and respect, if they were no longer present, then the rest of the edifice of rationality, the edifice of behavior, of moral behavior, the edifice of civilization would collapse. So, but here's the problem. So Kant recognizes there is a problem, but in this second sentence, Adorno and Horkheimer explain why Kant is powerless to fix the problem. And the reason why is because a priori, to use Kant's terms, Kant has decided to do what you mentioned, Michael. Kant has decided for reason, he wants to exalt reason. He wants to illuminate and explicate the power of reason, and he wants to announce the autonomy of reason. Reason, in order to be reason, has to be fully autonomous over all domains. And so that means he has to put science first,
right?
A notion of scientific efficiency. And so, because science and efficiency are exalted, even though Kant realizes there's a danger here, he can't fix the system. So, he can't fix the problem that he creates because he gave away the game at the beginning by saying that reason is the same thing as scientific reason and efficiency and self-preservation, the same self-preservation that Odysseus was an exemplary hero of in the last chapter, because he says that is enlightenment. He can't preserve the moral foundation that he feels is necessary to preserve.
So is that, like, as I'm looking at this, that essentially is the yellow section here, right?
Indeed,
When he says,
and I was
he
about
says,
to say the third sentence is that. Yes.
right. Enlightenment expels difference from theory, right? So
that's what happens.
So right. my understanding of that sentence is that basically, again, reason simply is. There is no difference here. This is that reason is bedrock. It
Right.
considers human actions and desires exactly as if it were dealing with lines, planes, and bodies. This is basically reducing
Yeah.
everything to
Yeah.
zeros and ones, right?
Right. Exactly.
There's
Perfect.
no moral filter
Perfect.
here. So if we take 1 plus 2 plus 2.5, somehow we get 3 in my math, right?
Somehow we get fascism.
We get
We get
green. Well,
fascism.
that's it. We get the green section. So he says, freed from supervision by one's own class, right? In other words, once morality has been done away with, right? I'm no longer beholden to external concerns. This is all about the individual, my own reason, right? I'm no longer concerned with to oblige 19th century businessmen to maintain respect and reciprocal love, right?
Once it becomes about self-preservation rather than the
Exactly.
other more foundations,
We have,
and power, that's the other part of it.
right, counting respect and reciprocal love, fascism, which by its own iron discipline relieves its peoples of the burden of moral feelings, no
Yeah.
longer need to observe any
Any discipline.
discipline.
This is
So
how you get, so in this Michael chose this passage, and it was, I think it's kind of the key passage of the chapter, because you have the 3 steps. You have, here is, we were talking about the mission of this chapter. The mission of this chapter is to make us understand an equivalence or some kind of close relation between Kant, Sade, fascism. And in this passage, they walk us through 3 steps from Kant to fascism.
right. So in other words, what happens is when you embrace Enlightenment thinking, you kill morality, right? There is no longer
Is it that, or you allow? I think I don't know. I push
too
back on
much.
against it slightly. Well, I would, yeah, I would want to temper it, but you tell me whether you agree with this. I would temper it and say this: once you, what was the first part of your sentence again? Because the first part of it, I totally agree.
Once you
Totally
embrace
agree with
the
the first part.
Enlightenment project, right?
Okay.
So embracing the Enlightenment project, let me rephrase it.
Means, I think that allows, okay, once you embrace or articulate the Enlightenment project, I was having an issue with the second part of it. You kill morality. It's not that.
No.
Yeah. You want to rephrase it?
You relieve yourself of the burden to be overly concerned with someone else's
Absolutely.
self-preservation, right?
And therefore, your own self-preservation becomes paramount.
Takes precedence, yes.
Yeah.
And so what happens there, right, is that the Enlightenment, we've talked about this in the prior episodes about this, that the stated goal of Enlightenment is to do away with superstition, to dominate nature, right, to modernize and make everything as efficient as possible. The goal is self-preservation and maximizing the efficiency of self-preservation. So 2 things happen in this, right? One, we do see a push back away from myth, which is religion and religious doctrine. Part and parcel of that is the moral component. And so what we've always considered morality now is shifted to a concern with self over others. And that's what happens. So the Enlightenment project, I spoke too quickly perhaps in saying it's the death of morality, but is certainly the inward shifting to self-preservation.
It leaves, yes, it leaves an opening for to be there's a ability now, or there's a possibility now, that new values can come to the fore. And the new values that come to the fore are self-preservation, self-interest. And if self-interest comes to the fore, then power relations become dominant. And there we're with Sade now. So do we want to talk a little bit about how this fits in with Sade before we go to, we have another passage we want to discuss, but I could try and describe, and you can,
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just sort of how Sade fits into this.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, see if I can say this concisely. How does Sade fit into this? So what's at the heart of Adorno and Horkheimer? I'll phrase this, I'll make this a statement rather than to a question. I think Adorno and Horkheimer isolate in Sade a project of enlightenment as human liberation from theology. That first and foremost, yes, it's articulated to sex, and sex is the primary model of expression in the Sadean system for this human liberation, the autonomy of reason, and a total and absolute atheism, a total and absolute, the ultimate enlightenment tool, i.e., if enlightenment means the destruction of myth, that's the Sadean project. So Adorno and Horkheimer say that, before anything else, there is an argument about the necessity that, the necessary, there's an argument or a desire to liberate humanity from myth.
Mm-hmm.
In the particular case of Sade, there is, a vehement anti-Catholicism. He identifies Catholicism as, understandably enough, he identifies Catholicism as the linchpin ideology of the Ancien regime, what the revolutionary regime is trying to replace. And he understands the replacement of the old order with God and King at the head. He understands that there's an overturning of the system. He wants humanity, untrammeled humanity, aided only by reason. This gets into what you were talking about before. Humanity only guided by reason is going to take the place of God and King. So that's the primary foundation. Now, over that, or the main way in which Sade understands human liberation is through sexual liberation.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where Adorno and Horkheimer come in. They think that it's not an accident, it's not a coincidence, it's a logical fulfillment of the Sadean system, that sexual liberation, because Sade begins, think about what we just talked about. We talked about how Kant's premise that reason needs to be fully autonomous of everything, how it kind of entails with it or creates within this new system of enlightenment a weakness that, a possibility that new values could take over and dominate the system. With Sade, just sort of to bring it to close with Sade, Adorno and Horkheimer think the same thing is going on, or the same thing happened, parallel development. Sade begins with a systemic desire to exalt humanity over myth and to exalt reason. Sex is the main vehicle for this human liberation, according to Adorno and Horkheimer, because reason, this notion of this undialectical notion of reason, is at the heart of the system. It's inevitable that sex in Sade turns out to be bloody, turns out to be something that's guided, as they mention over and over again. It's guided by efficiency. Love goes by the wayside, as we're going to talk about it a little bit. And it becomes a business of power and domination.
Yeah, I think to simplify it, if you think about what the Marquis de Sade has done in terms of the reframing of sex as it fits the Enlightenment model here, right?
Much better.
He's liberated it, right? And so how is he liberated, and what has that liberation done in terms of reframing it? Okay, so sex prior to the Enlightenment, right, is something that takes place in marriage as a sort of mutual engagement. Okay, now you can argue you want about sort of the hierarchy between men and women in this, but it is still a mutual act. I don't think it's a mistake that the protagonist is female here. Again, it is a liberation, but it goes from being a mutual, a mutual project, okay, to
a power game.
To a power game, but also a very singular power game. This is about pleasure, and it is about Juliette's pleasure. It is not about some sort of mutual sanctioned project, right?
It's about maximizing my own pleasure. It becomes similar to economic projects.
For the sake of pleasure itself, though. It is no longer aimed at reproduction or at church or the role of the church in marriage. This has nothing to do with any of that. In fact, if you, and I'm not going to go through this in graphic detail, you can find it. There's this really sort of passage that should be graphic, but it's so clinical about the maximization of every orifice, and I'll just leave it there. But sex has become a business of efficiency, of maximizing efficiency in the name of pleasure. But you have to remember that pleasure is sort of this emotional, non-reasoned experience that is a secondary or tertiary concern to the act itself. So in a weird way, Juliette's liberation both kills sex and the enjoyment of sex in the name of chasing down some maximized version of pleasure. It's a very bizarre and sort of twisted reordering of things.
But according to Adorno Horkheimer, they naturally follow because of the premises of his system, because of how Sade understands liberation and human emancipation. Necessarily, the system becomes one of, it's about maximizing my own self-interest, and it's about efficiency, and it's no longer about pleasure in the older sense, whatever that older sense might have been.
No, right? It becomes about, well, as they argue, and we'll jump into this now, I guess, it becomes about cruelty. This becomes about domination. So
this is a good segue.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in and see if I can share
Let's
again.
get some color coding going on.
Here we go. So now we're in blue, and we've lost ourselves. Let me pull ourselves back down here. There we are. Okay, so a little further down. Rather than with tenderness, pleasure makes its pact with cruelty, and sexual love becomes what, according to Nietzsche, it always was. In its means, war, and at its basis, the mortal hatred of the sexes. With both the male and the female, zoology teaches us love or sexual attraction is originally and preeminently sadic. It is positively gratified by the infliction of pain. It is as cruel as hunger. Thus, as its final result, civilization leads back to the terrors of nature.
Let me a quick gloss on that last sentence.
By all means.
This is another sort of constant theme of the book, right? A constant project throughout the book. Adorno and Horkheimer. This is called the Dialectic of Enlightenment, which means that they're always interested when Enlightenment and barbarism flip over into each other, when they morph, when these things morph, because their idea of dialecticizing Enlightenment means that they're aware of the ways in which, once you articulate Enlightenment, it can become barbarism. Also, there are articulations of barbarism, myth, and ritual, or there are articulations of myth and ritual that can lead to barbarism. Here, we have the kind of reversal that Adorno and Horkheimer are looking for, where we have civilization, human enlightenment at its zenith in Sade, leading back to, what was the quote, terrors of nature? Civilization.
Yeah, the final result, civilization leads back to the terrors of nature. So just to follow up on barbarism, they go a little bit down. To reason, devotion to the adored creature appears as idol worship. So in other words, rid of it. Right, so the Enlightenment project essentially is the death of love, right? Like, we no longer have love at the core of these acts. This is now purely it's a transaction in the name of pleasure, and that's how you get Juliette, essentially.
I wouldn't say that, again, I resist the language like, these ideas kill things. They don't kill things, but what they do, they subtly kill things. They damage things, because in Sade, there is no reason to have love. There's no rational legitimation or sanction for love in the system. There's no rational place for love in the system. Therefore, it gets excluded. I think that's how I would put it. I don't think it's like killing things.
I don't mean it as in an actual murder of love.
Yeah, what it's not a murder of ideas.
It is a marginalization. It is a push. This is no longer. When I say it's the death of love, or earlier I said the death of morals, what I should probably have said instead is
marginalization.
This is the marginalization.
Yes,
right. It is no longer part and parcel of the project.
Absolutely.
There we go. Okay, so we have now moved morality to the side. We have now moved love to the side. So the question is, I guess, what next? And for that, I will refer back again to our dear friends. The problem with the Enlightenment, let me find where we are here and share the screen again. The great reveal. Which text are we going? Which part of the text are we going to talk about next? At the end, the problem with the Enlightenment project. They say, in Sade as in Mandeville, private vices are anticipatory historiography of public virtues in the totalitarian era. It is because they did not hush up the impossibility of deriving from reason a fundamental argument against murder, but proclaimed it from the rooftops that Sade and Nietzsche are still vilified above all by progressive thinkers.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is an example of, and there are many examples of this in the text. This is an example of Adorno and Horkheimer's very mordant wit. So the problem with Sade and Nietzsche for contemporary thinkers, they're contemporary thinkers, 20th century thinkers, is that they gave the game away. They said, "Hey, you really want enlightenment? You got to get rid of these ideas. You got to admit the impossibility of deriving from reason any argument for love, any rational basis, you have to deny that the possibility of presenting a rational argument against murder, or a rational defense of love, or any of these or pity. That's another sort of emotion and moral trait that are submitted to genealogy and sort of humiliated by both Sade and Nietzsche, according to Adorno, Horkheimer. You have to give up on the idea of having a moral basis. But most thinkers like Kant weren't brave enough to say that. Kant wanted, so in a curious way, Sade and Nietzsche, after criticizing pretty harshly Adorno and Horkheimer, do some harsh critiques of both Sade and Nietzsche. But in that sentence, I think there's a kind of bitter, cynical or jokey suggestion that at least they were honest. Kant was intellectually dishonest. He thought you could keep morality and you could get rid of morality in the Enlightenment system, or you could say there's no rational basis for it, but you could keep it. Sade knew better. Nietzsche knew better. And now we sure know better. The Nazis don't even need to make an apology.
Well, it's not so. I don't think that it's some. This is my turn to push back for a second. I don't think it's so much saying that Kant said you can get rid of morality. I think this gets us back to the very beginning, where Kant was hopeful somehow.
Yes, exactly.
That morality would sustain itself through,
despite the critique,
through the primacy of reason.
Yeah.
It's somehow, and so what he missed or failed to account for, you could call capitalism, but really we would just say power. And so I think that what we've seen here is that when you introduce power as a motive, right, morality dies. And I do not mean is marginalized. I mean, it is sought out and crushed, because that's
by the 20th century, it dies. It is killed and murdered. Exactly. You're right. That's progression.
And what you get is fascism.
Exactly. Fascism is the systematic, here we can use the word kill. Sade is trying to kill it. Kant is not, as you point out. Kant is not trying to kill it.
He's hopeful that somehow this will be okay.
Yes, exactly. It's going to work out according to Kant. But again, the mordant wit of that particular, the bitter wit of that particular passage, that Adorno and Horkheimer are saying, at least Kant was really kind of foolish to think this would happen. At least Sade and Nietzsche are consistent.
It does come off that way. And, I think we should probably wrap up soon. But before we do, I want to ask, is it enough? I mean, for Kant just to say, well, this will work out unless things go
Go bad, and they do.
badly, then things are gonna, and because if they go bad, it's gonna be really, really bad.
And he said it, Michael, that quote we began with. He said it's going to, I can't remember his wonderful rhetoric, but something about gaping maws and
Yeah, and
abysses,
so
and
I'm sort of
everything is going to collapse. He's very flowery about it.
I'm puzzled by how that can be a thing, I guess. And
It
maybe,
is you're right. It's a strange, it's like, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to have enlightenment and it's going to be awesome. Except, you know what? If this one thing happens, it's going to be the end of civilization as we know it. But that's cool. Whatever.
I mean,
Whatever.
there's to my mind, there's either a glaring lack of reason or an absolutely inexplicable optimism about that
Well,
statement, and I
well, how
can't
about we go
quite,
for this? Yeah.
I can't square it with reality.
Well, how about this? Uh, let There's a possibility here. I'm going to make a quick argument that maybe it's the latter, that maybe this is an outcome. This is another way in which Kant and Sade are kin, really kin. So Sade, as soon as there was the first wave of, as soon as the Bastille was liberated, Sade wrote a pamphlet saying, one more step. Frenchman, I can't remember the exact title here, but he wrote a pamphlet where he basically is addressing, still in prison, I think. He's addressing the French public and said, hey, you freed the Bastille, you took control of the government. You got to kill the king. You got to kill the king. One more step, Frenchmen, if you want to be true revolutionaries. And so kill the king. So, once you kill the king, in other words, Sade is writing in a moment of revolutionary fervor. Maybe Kant is too. And maybe revolutionary fervor explains his optimism. He was just so optimistic that human autonomy would fulfill itself in a wonderful way, that we would have an enlightenment kingdom throughout the world. Kant is also the great thinker of cosmopolitanism, where he imagined a kind of universal humanity. He starts theorizing about the possibility of a universal politics, a universal humanity, of a world government. That all comes from Kant too. So maybe it is optimism, but it's like a revolutionary optimism.
I guess I don't know. I mean, I look at it and it's like I'm not trying to sum this up with some sort of,
Yeah, we're not going
pithy
to
and
get an
reductive
answer
thing,
at
but
that.
it's like, but it's like, wow, okay, so how's this end? Well, there's one of two ways that it's going to end. Either A, somehow it's all going to work out, or B, we all get laid and it's horrible. And I don't know.
I just looked up to sort of get the to be a little bit more historically correct. One more effort, Frenchmen, if you want to be revolutionaries. That was the polemic that Sade wrote at the height of the revolution. And basically he's saying, come on, you started this thing. We got to kill the king. We got to go the whole way. And that's what Sade is about. He feels there is a moment in history, in human history, where we can push it to the limit. And Kant isn't saying let's kill the king, but maybe he has
Well,
this
but
huge optimism about human potential and the possibility of a collective reformation, a transformation of everything, really.
yeah, I think this is going to be something that we come back to when we consider the book's project in its entirety. Is, we're sitting here looking at this in sections, but the question of what, the larger implications of Enlightenment society really are in terms of I think this is a really good deconstruction that lets us say, oh my God, this is how we end up with fascism.
Yeah.
This is how we end up with
Yeah,
Hitler.
it's
This is
brilliant.
how we end up with genocide. I mean, you can follow it down all these really terrible rabbit holes, and somehow they're logical conclusions. So I think that that's my walk. That's my
Let me give a quick takeaway that I'm
yeah.
basically taking away from the internet. Let's end on a comic note, shall we? Since we haven't necessarily been comic. So I was looking up just a moment ago. I started Googling Sade and One More Effort. And I was trying to find the title of that pamphlet that Sade wrote. What Google gave me was Sade. Do you remember Sade, Michael?
Yes, I do.
So the first thing when I typed up Sade is I found out No Ordinary Love
It's not.
by Sade. In a way, that kind of is accurate. No Ordinary Love. That's my takeaway. I'm done. I'm out of here.
All right.
Mic drop.
Indeed. We will pick up next time, I guess, with the culture industry.
Wow. This is the moment we've all been waiting for, isn't it?
Indeed. So, okay. Well, this, I think, is definitely one of those episodes where, we'll renew our call to those of you listening and watching to, engage and respond to this. I think that this is a fascinating sort of juxtaposition here between Enlightenment and the horrors of fascism. And, yeah, I'd be curious to have other voices weigh in.
Just along those lines, maybe I'll join your call to readers, to listeners and watchers, viewers. And I'll add something specific. I know we've talked about this, Michael. We're struggling to, we were very conscious we're leaving a lot on the table here in our discussion of everything in this book, right? We leave a lot on the table because there's so much. This is such a rich text. There's so many avenues. There's, for example, a mini history of morality that is, and a whole discussion of the ways in which anti-Semitism articulates with misogyny and all these things. There's so many sub-arguments, rich sub-arguments in each chapter, but especially in this one. If listeners and viewers who are familiar with the text, are thinking, hey, yeah, how did you not talk about this? We would like to engage you on that. And, we'd like to, we're thinking about having an episode, a sort of wrap up or post Dialectic of Enlightenment episode at the end of the series. And we can address, some of the points that we left on the table because we know we're leaving a lot on the table, maybe in that episode. So yeah, please feel free to chime in and tell us what we missed, what you think is an important point that we missed.
Well, until then, Barry, as always, thank you for your uplifting conversation today.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Sade moment. I'm always there for Sade.
That's where I'm headed as soon as I end this. So thank you, and we'll do this again soon.
We'll do it again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.